Now, the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic continues to wreak havoc on the global economy. Among those sectors affected, financial technology startups across Africa, which had been offering a helping hand to an underdeveloped industry. In fact, experts say that the continent had experienced a FinTech revolution. Now, for more on this story, let's cross to Jake Kendall. He's the director of a digital financial services innovation lab at Caribou Digital. Thank you so much for being with us this Thursday, Jake. This is not necessarily a story that's been on top of the news agenda. Can you tell us why it's significant?
Well, I think fundamentally the digital economy players, financial services, startups, e-commerce players in Africa we're in the process of creating a new digital economy for a part of the world that's really mostly been used to transacting and doing things in cash. And so there was a lot of excitement and optimism building this whole new set of products and banking technologies. And that whole world has been kind of upended at this point because, as I said, a lot of the African economies are really much more based on cash than, say, the European economies, where a lot of people pay already. We're used to paying with credit cards or phones or what have you. And so that's had ripple effects through the entire economy and, of course, through the sector of technology startups who are trying to work in that area.
If anything, isn't this something that they should be picking up on? Because during this crisis, many governments have been calling for measures aimed at facilitating more cashless, if you like, transactions. So wouldn't Africa pick up on this and pick up on the momentum?
Yeah, actually, that's true. A lot of the governments across the continent have been enacting all kinds of special policies in this area. Some of them have reduced for example, the amount of identity documents and sort of bureaucracy you need to open a bank account or a financial account. Some of them have reduced fees on transfers and other financial transactions. Some of them have even had holidays for credit reporting so that people who fall behind on a debt or something like that aren't penalized during the crisis. A lot of them have raised the transactional volume caps for certain kinds of mobile money type payments, and you've seen people, use right up to the new cap. So it's clearly sort of a big latent demand for these digital payment technologies that do exist and that are already being used. So some of those government policies have started to promote that stuff for sure. And a lot of the financial technology companies themselves are trying to jump in and fill that gap, helping people do transactions digitally, and also helping the governments who are trying to put money into the economy get that money out in a digital form to the whole population.
And how is your company's work panning out during this crisis, Caribou Digital?
Yeah, and the DFS lab. Yeah, so we have been working a lot with the companies that we support. A DFS lab is an investor in a lot of early stage companies in Africa. We're working with some of the more exciting, new technologies and digital commerce innovations out there. But those smaller early stage companies really are, obviously there's a lot of anxiety about what's going to happen next. No one fully knows. And there's a lot of transition going on, especially in the fundraising area. It's very difficult to raise money from investors if you can't be in the same room, if you can't, go shake hands, have dinner, all that kind of thing. A lot of those investments are based on relationships. So that's taking a lot longer. And a lot of the companies are really feeling a lot of anxiety and possibility that they could run out of funding. And I think that's brought up a whole interesting dynamic in the industry where, some companies are doing better, even much better. And these tend to be the ones who are doing delivery and who are facilitating the kind of new buying patterns that everyone who's in confinement is now getting used to. Some are doing much worse, as you might imagine. And there's a lot of talk of the companies that are doing better, or the ones that have more funding available through their investors, acquiring other companies or consolidating in the industry so that there's going to be winners and losers, and a lot of them may merge or consolidate in ways that will be very interesting to watch.
Jake, I'm going to leave you with one question, because you mentioned anxiety on the one side and some companies doing better on the other. Will this pandemic, in your opinion, propel Africa into becoming a digital economy, a fully fledged one, or actually impede its progress?
I think it's almost certainly pushing things forward in a more digital direction. You see, for example, a lot of retail stores and businesses who weren't used to doing things digitally now switching to digital, even doing so in a really informal way. So it's actually interesting because in Europe or United States, the big e-commerce players have done very well through the crisis, right? Everyone's ordering online and having delivered at home. A lot of the ones in Africa haven't done as well because they were focused more on higher end electronics and sort of more extravagant items that people buy on a more or less regular basis. People have almost completely stopped buying those kinds of things and switched to really just sticking with the necessities, right? How do I get my weekly food and all that kind of thing? And the smaller local shops and grocery store chains and things like that have had to adapt because people want to order, they want to pay digitally, they want to do this all digitally because they can't leave their home. And so a lot of those smaller and less digital traditional retailers and companies are starting to find ways to do this online. They're doing it over WhatsApp and sending deliveries over local logistics companies. So there's been a real shock to the system that has caused a lot of businesses to have to figure out how to become more digital. So I do think it will push things forward.
Jake Kendall of DFS Lab, I'd like to thank you for speaking to us about the impact of course, the COVID-19 pandemic on financial technology sector in Africa. Thanks for being with us. Now for some good news from